After the flames have been put out, the effects of wildfires continue. The removal of vegetation by fire leaves naked soil for a number of years, causing soil erosion, increased stormwater runoff, and possibly landslides and debris flows. 3 to 5 years after a crown fire kills the conifers in a forest, the roots of the dead trees rot. If a large rainstorm comes in, landslides can occur and cause large-scale damage. 3 scientists will tell us about what happens following wildfires and some ideas for management measures to reduce problems.
When a wildfire burns vegetation and the surface fuel, so shrubs, grasses, trees, other plants, and the material that's on the ground, so the dead leaves and needles and sticks, a considerable amount of heat is released from that burning. And some of that heat is transferred to the soil, which has a big effect. And these changes can reduce the capacity of the soil to absorb water, which leads to increased surface runoff. So when it rains, the soil no longer absorbs that rainfall, which then runs off over the ground. It also makes the soil more erodible. And all these things combined lead to increased runoff and erosion, right? And possibly flooding or large-scale deposition of sediment downstream.
The primary post-fire debris flow mechanism we think about for these areas, particularly in the first year after a fire, are what are called runoff-generated post-fire debris flows. One way to think about these debris flows is that they're a pretty chaotic mix of water, soil, rock, vegetation that didn't burn or was left over after a burn, like big logs or other types of woody debris. And so it's a particularly big hazard, and compared to floods can be a problem, but floods don't necessarily carry the same kind of sediment or debris load. And so that debris load in a debris flow is moving faster than you can run and can impose a lot more impact force because it's entrained with all of this debris.
Lots of things have been tried to mitigate the runoff and erosion from burned areas over several decades. Earlier and the more commonly tried things include seeding with grasses or other vegetation. Society has tried applying various chemicals to either bind the soil or increase its ability to absorb or store water or encourage natural regrowth. And is adding various types of mulch or vegetative matter to the hill slopes to cover the soil surface. And the most effective thing we found is adding some type of mulch or surface cover to the soil surface helps protect it from that raindrop and runoff, and it really reduces erosion considerably. There's lots of different mulches that we tried, but agricultural straw works really well. It lasts for a year or two, which is around the time that you want to be considering for that window of exposure. Another one that we found works really well is mulch made from shredded local trees. So there's devices you could rent or conceivably a contractor could bring to the site, and it would grind up the residual trees or shrubs, and you could spread that then and help protect the soil surface. All these things have been done typically in the first few years after a fire, maybe 1 to 3 years after a wildfire. And this is when the risks of the post-fire flooding and erosion are highest.
But what happens is you have this really rapid increase in decomposition. So the microbial communities become much more active. And that happens within weeks to months that we start to see a measurable decline in the tensile strength of the roots. And so tensile strength is how hard you need to pull on a root for it to break. After 2 or 3 years, conifers have lost 80 to 90% of their tensile strength. So that's a dramatic decrease in the amount of reinforcement in the soil in these post-fire areas that we've studied in the Pacific Northwest. This is a pretty rapid decline over this 2 to 3 years, and then the root reinforcement stays at that low level until new species and new root systems start to come in. So we talk about something called a window of vulnerability, and that is anywhere between, say, 3 to 10 years after a fire, when the existing dead trees have experienced, rapid decomposition. There's very little root reinforcement left, and it's before the new stand has had a chance to really get pervasive roots out there.
We've also tried removing the burned vegetation, such as in post-fire salvage logging. Thought that disturbance actually reduces some of the negative effects of the fire. And there's longer-term things like the landslides that might happen after root decay. And in that case, revegetation is the most commonly applied. So either by planting trees or some other vegetation, shrubs, for example, or allowing that vegetation to regrow on its own.
Management can accelerate the rate of restabilization by adding these saplings and having these plantings come in and more rapidly take hold.
For the past 100 years in California, we have suppressed wildfire. The result of this has been very dense, thick forests. And when they burn, they typically burn all the way into the crown of the trees and the trees die. Once those trees are dead, their roots rot. And the result of that is that you can have landslides and debris flows. If you have a burned forest on your property, we strongly suggest that you remove a portion of the burned trees and replant with native conifers. We'd like to acknowledge the agencies that provided the funding for these videos: the California Department of Food and Agriculture and the U.S. Department of Agriculture. If you would like to learn more on these subjects, please visit our website.